Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chasing Legends podcast. This is week 2 of our hunting stories series that we're running here in the winter and into the spring of 2020. I just got this idea because I feel like hunting stories are what keep the juices flowing to get us into the summer, into the fall, when things really start to ramp up for good old deer season. So we this week we're moving. Last week we were with John Woodall in Alabama, who had good luck putting down his biggest buck to date down in central Alabama. And this week we're moving to the Midwest, to Missouri. We're actually going to be talking to a buddy of mine in Michigan, and him and I went on a hunt in Missouri the first week of November this past fall. And man, did we have a good week. I didn't kill a buck that really I went there to kill, but that's for another story. We had a really good week. My dad shot a really good buck. Tom Robbie's, who we'll be talking to, his dad shot a really good buck. And we'll leave what Robbie was able to do. We'll leave it up to him to tell us that. So, like I said, last week we've covered the South. This week kind of moving into the Midwest. We're going to talk about this Missouri hunt. Robbie had a hell of a 7 days, and I'm really looking forward to you guys listening. Feel free to, find us on Instagram at Chasing Legends, and you can email me at chasinglegends247@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook. Look us up, follow us, and if you have a good hunting story you'd like to share, maybe we can get you on the podcast. So, without further ado, we'll roll into week 2 of our hunting stories series with Robbie Enslin right about now.
What's up?
What's up, B? How you doing, man?
Doing good.
Doing good?
Are we on the show right now?
Yeah, you're live, brother. Hey, are you on speakerphone right now?
I am. Does this sound better?
That's a lot better if you could do that.
Alright, yeah, no problem.
Perfect. So, how are things up in northern Michigan, man?
Just living the dream. I'm pretty hooked on ice fishing right now.
Yeah, everybody and their mother is up there, man.
Yeah,
How have you been doing?
Not so. I shouldn't say not so hot. It's been okay, I would say. I have my ups and downs, just like deer season. Sometimes I've had a couple really good days where I caught a ton of perch, caught a few walleye. So can't complain, man. At least getting out there and being active.
And for our listeners here in Michigan, you're moving pretty darn close to good old Mullet Lake, aren't you?
Yep, I actually just bought a house. Well, we're in the process of closing right now, actually. My house is going to be in Toppinabee. I don't know if you guys know where that is, or many people have heard of it, but it's just north of Indian River. And I'm half a mile from the lake, so I can get out there pretty easily. Mullet and Burt both are within a mile of the house, so I'll be fishing both of them very hard.
Well, anybody who listens to this and knows anything about fishing in Michigan, I'm sure they're pretty jealous. And I'm looking forward to you learning where those walleye and where those smallmouth are.
Yeah, once spring hits, I'm pretty hooked on ice fishing right now, and I'm still chasing the perch and walleye, but as soon as spring comes, I'll be chasing the smallies full bore,
Heck yeah, man.
Yeah, they're very good lakes to fish, and I'm just trying to learn them. New to the area, so.
Good, man. Well, I'm excited for you, man. Well, this is Robbie's second time on the podcast. For listeners, he was on in the fall telling us a story of his northern Michigan success this year, and we kind of chatted a little bit about Missouri. We were still looking forward to that trip, but now that trip's in the rearview mirror. I really wanted to talk to Robbie about and have him share what his week was like in Missouri, just because I feel like it's probably the most action-packed whitetail week you've had in your life.
Probably, honestly, it might sound corny, but it's probably the best week of my life, just in general. And I didn't even shoot a deer. I was born not to come home with a deer that week. And, it was something I hadn't really experienced before. It's been on my bucket list for a long time to hunt the Midwest, the first or second week in November, trying to get that rut or the time of the rut. And we hit it just perfectly. Honestly, it felt like, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where it could have been better.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we can get into this in a little bit. It could have been a little bit better if we weren't working with cut beans with standing corn
Yep.
all around
Yeah.
us at a couple of the properties.
Yep. It can never be perfect, but like I said, I had such a great experience just being able to see the rut in the Midwest that so many people talk about, and I saw some great deer. I really did, and I know you did too. And I definitely got my heart pumping on a few different occasions. I had some close calls, but just couldn't seal the deal that week. But it gives me hope for the next time that I'm out there. So.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, after that week we had, we'd be stupid not to go back out there a few more times.
No, I actually just confirmed my trip last week. My dad called me, and I'm going to be heading back out there November 6th this year. So,
Look at you, man.
I know. I can't miss out on it. I can't even imagine not going now that I've done it.
And you're going on an elk hunt before that, right?
I am. On October the 7th, I'm going to Colorado. So that'll be another new experience for me, another thing on the bucket list that I'm ready to pursue, and I'm really looking forward to it. I have a very exciting fall ahead of me, and I'm just ready for it to get here, honestly. Even though, I don't want to rush the fall. I'm still enjoying my time fishing, and I want to enjoy my summer, but there's nothing better than the fall, that's for sure.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you're able to knock out of these few bucket list hunts. It's the time to do it, man, before, you got kids on the way and it's a good time to do it, for sure.
Yes,
and I'm sure we'll talk to you on that elk hunt. But anyway, I want to get back to Missouri because it was so Robbie and I, we stayed, actually our little house that we stayed in at was in Bedford, Iowa, which is like, I mean, if there's such thing as, deer heaven, that's where it is.
Oh, jeez.
And we hunted about 25 miles south of Bedford, Iowa, in northwest Missouri. And I'm going to kick it off right away, Rob. My dad and your dad got there a day before you did to kind of scout out the piece. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take long. We had access to how big was that piece of property that your dad shot his buck on?
I think it was a 120 acre parcel.
Yeah, we had a 120, an 80, and a 110. Was that it?
I don't know. It was something like that.
Yeah, we had. Yeah. Long story short, we had access to 3 different properties, and we, after walking all 3 of them the day before our hunt started, it didn't take long to figure out that one of them really stood out in front of the other 2. We actually kicked up a really good buck while we were walking it. But anyway, so the first morning, my dad and I went to a different piece of property, but Robbie and his dad Robbie got in about, what time did you get in the night before the hunt?
So I worked the day before, so I came in, I know I got an hour of sleep the night before the morning. I technically got in there because I remember it was an hour before in Missouri, or an hour earlier time zone. So, gosh, we would leave at 5 or something like that every morning to head to the property. So I probably got there at 3 or 4 in the morning or something.
Yeah, it was like 3.
On the floor.
It was between 3 and 4. I know you. I remember. You literally got an hour of sleep before we head out. But so anyway, my dad and I went to one property. Tom and Robbie's dad, went to the piece that we kind of target as the piece, and I'll let Robbie take it from there.
Yeah. So all I know about the 3 properties we had permission on, I pretty much looked them up on Onyx, knew nothing about them, and I know you guys were there the day before and had seen this property in daylight, so I was just kind of following what my dad had saw the day before. And anyway, long story short, we get there. It didn't take us long to start walking into the woods and get lost. That was like, it was honestly extremely irritating and frustrating morning. to begin with, but little did we know that it was going to be one of the most memorable hunts we had ever been on. So we walked, and
You guys weren't even lost in the woods. You guys were lost in pretty much an open field.
yeah, wide open. So it was kind of rolling hills, and there was patches of timber and stuff like that. I was following my dad, and anyway, we all of a sudden we're walking, and we're in this apple orchard. And my dad he said that he didn't really know where we were, and I was starting to get light. So you know that feeling when you're late in the morning. There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, a deer blows at us, so we're all pissed off. And so it was just one of those mornings. It's like, gosh, we're just ruining this hunt, waste of time. What the heck are we doing? So I was just like, Dad, you go sit over there, just sit on the ground. I'll go over here, sit on the ground, and we'll just see what happens, see if we can spot something. We were really just trying to figure something out, where the deer were and things like that. And right away, I sit down next to the pond, and I see a couple does in the apple orchard feeding. I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm not expecting to shoot anything.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on the ground with a bow next to an apple tree, but I don't even have my arrow knocked or anything. I'm just watching. And all of a sudden, it's daylight now, and my dad calls me, and he goes, I've seen one buck already, saw a couple does, and then while we're on the phone, I hear him freak out, and his voice gets really high, saying, buck, 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 oh my gosh. And that was all of a sudden he hangs up on me. I was like, all right. I remember we're only like 200 yards apart or something like that. And my dad uses a crossbow, so all of a sudden I hear whack, and I know that sound. Everybody who's been hunting for a while knows the sound of when a deer gets shot. I was like, no way, that did not just happen. After the morning we had experienced, walking out there, we don't know where we are, and starting to get light, we're irritated, a deer blows at us. It couldn't have been an hour later, and I hear my dad shoot. So, of course, instantly I call him, and his heart's, you can just hear it in his voice. He's all jacked up. He just shot a buck. And I'm like, honestly, I was in disbelief. I was like, there's no way he just shot a buck. And I had seen a couple does during that time period. Nothing exciting for me. So, and I wasn't really sitting in a good spot. Like I said, I was just sitting there scouting. So I was like, I guess I'll work my way over to my dad. And sure enough, man, I mean, he was all jacked up. Said he had this buck come right down the tree line that he just randomly picked and sat on. I mean, it just, every deer hunter knows that it never, ever happens.
And he's laying like on his stomach in a open clover field.
You wouldn't even imagine how, it was complete luck. There's no question about it. And the funny thing is when I got there and he's all excited telling me the story, the deer was probably 5 steps from getting downwind of him. I mean, he wasn't even set up with a good wind direction where my dad was sitting. It just was one of those things that was meant to be, and we had a great moment. It was a perfect morning, probably 40 degrees, and all of a sudden the 7-day trip where we think we're already bored in the first hour, which we were just trying to learn something. You know? Sure enough, we gave it a little bit of time, and the more that we thought that was the craziest part of the morning, and it wasn't. We were sitting, so we're at the bottom of the ridge, and we're sitting there looking for blood and looking for his arrow. We're still on the high, you know, of shooting a buck, a night buck. And I don't know what, my dad just told me that he was heavy and he wasn't very wide. He was pretty tall, but he said he was a nice buck. So of course we're excited. We're sitting there looking for blood, and then all of a sudden these deer come pouring over the ridge at me and my dad. We're in the wide open field, and 3 bucks are on this doe. You can obviously tell the rut is in full swing. So my dad and I dropped to our stuff just because we're like, what the heck is going on? And these deer are probably only 75 yards from us, and we're just laying down on our stuff. So it's a wide open field. And they were all chasing this hot doe and pant, just like you would see on TV, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And one of the bucks was just an absolute stud. I'm not the great at scoring deer, but I mean, there's no way he was under 140 inches. Just an absolute tank. Just a great buck. And we were just sitting there. We were tracking, and we were just standing where my dad had hit the buck probably an hour before. We were just looking for first blood, and then we were going to back out. And the really cool thing was I had my bow on me, and the giant bucks went and chased the doe over the hill, and then the other two bucks stayed. And one of the bucks had a collar on his neck, which at this moment I had no idea that was even a thing. I come to find out later that this is a thing that Missouri does to help track their deer and things like that.
Completely legal to shoot. I mean,
yep. And it was a nice 8-point. Steven ended up having an encounter. Steven and his dad had an encounter with the same buck later in the week, but I actually called this deer in. We were just messing around with it because we were out in the wide open field with a bow. It was one of the craziest things I've ever done. I knocked my bow just in case. I didn't think anything was going to happen. And I just started grunting with my mouth at this deer because they were just standing there in the wide open field. And I actually ended up almost getting two different opportunities at this buck. And I have it all on film. It was a pretty cool story. So, long story short, it was a crazy morning, that first morning. And after that encounter with those 3 bucks on that hot doe, we ended up finding my dad's buck on the top of the hill, man. And as you know, that was a great deer. It was a great way to start the trip.
Yeah, that ended up being the best buck we shot on the trip.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't score it or anything like that, but this was definitely a mature deer. We actually, I mean, after looking at a lot of deer in that area, we figured that buck was probably on its way down.
Yeah.
Very easily could have been a 5, 6, 7-year-old buck.
Yeah, very heavy, short, stubby body, but just a heavy deer.
John,
remember the neck on that thing?
Yeah, I mean, I post a picture of it on Instagram, but I'll post another when I post this podcast. I mean, everything about it was heavy. I mean, the mass on the antlers, even though it wasn't a giant antler-wise, just the mass and, like, its head literally sunk into its neck because the neck was so big. Just a stud of a buck.
Just a crazy first morning, man. It was nuts. It was a memory I'll never forget, and a memory I cherish with my dad. And it was, this is something, me personally, I've been waiting to do for my whole life. You grow up watching all these hunting shows and all the idols that you look up to, hunting Missouri and Iowa and Kansas and all these states. And they're hunting it the first and second week in November, and I had never experienced that before. And that first morning, I had these encounters with 4 different bucks, and my dad was able to put an arrow in one of them, and I saw 2 of the biggest bucks I've ever seen in my life in person that first morning. So obviously I was very optimistic for the rest of the week, knowing the quality of deer in that area and knowing that they were on the property.
Yeah, and I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. It's pretty amazing what you were, that morning, you kind of cut and said, long story short, but that morning you were, like, the rut was so heavy. Those bucks were, I mean, I hate to say the word, but they were so stupid that you were sitting behind what some people would think is a twig. Like, that tree was not covering your body, and you were grunting these bucks in with your mouth.
I know. And people who don't believe me, I actually have footage of it, and obviously we're on a podcast and can't really show it, but I would love for people to see that somehow. It was, hands down, it's one of those memories where you just never forget in the woods. Some of the best memories you create while hunting are not the kills, and you know that, and anybody who's been a hunter their entire life, there's moments, these short moments that you have that you tell the story over and over and over to every hunter that you see. And that was just one. I don't even know what made me do it. Grunting it with my mouth. I was like, this deer's. I was so used to Michigan. When a deer sees you, it darts. It never questions what you are. It just knows a threat. So I just see these 2 bucks 75 yards away. So I just kneel behind an apple tree in a wide open field. And I just was like, all right, they're not running away. What the heck's going on? So I just started grunting with my mouth. And then I see this dandy 8-point just start posturing like he's pissed off, not knowing what the heck I am. And I'm just like, all right, what's happening? And then all of a sudden he's coming at me. I'm like, what is going on? And I remember drawing back on him. He's probably 45, and that was a nice 8-point. I mean, I don't know what he would score. What do you think a deer like that would score?
I mean, he was probably like a 3-year-old, 120, 125-inch 8-point.
At first I wasn't even thinking about shooting him, but the encounter was so crazy. The story was so nuts, and the buck had a collar on his neck. I was like, what is happening? This mature deer is coming into the grunt of my mouth while I'm in a wide open field bow hunting. Like, this doesn't happen.
And at this point, you didn't, like, the landowner had told us previous morning, if you see a deer with a collar on it, that's the DNR's doing, they're totally legal to shoot, fair game. And you, because you were calling this thing in with your mouth, it seemed like a somewhat mature buck, you literally thought it was somebody's pet.
I know. I remember on the video, you can hear me say it if you would pay attention closely. I said, is that somebody's pet? I said something along those lines. I'm like, can I shoot it? Like, what the heck is going on? And I drew back on him at 45, and he gets downwind of me, and he busts. And he goes back up the hill, and so I just start grunting again. And then he starts coming down to my left with this other buck. And unfortunately, the other buck, he gets like 10 yards from me and busts me. But it was just crazy, crazy run experience that I've never experienced before. And I'll never forget, that's for sure.
That was an amazing morning.
It was.
We had another encounter with that collared buck, but I'm gonna have my old man on the podcast telling him his side of that. So,
that's a good story.
Yeah, that was awesome. But so moving on to the later on that week, for yourself, I know that night you really didn't have any action. You went to a different piece of property, but kind of move us through the week in all the ridiculous encounters that you had.
I really just, like I said, I was the only one that didn't shoot a buck, but my experience was just, it couldn't have been better. Like,
was that night 2 what happened, or night 3?
It was night 2 when I did get a shot. So that before that, I hunted. We had the 3 properties, and the thing about the other 2 properties, they looked so promising, but like Steven kind of attested to before, we came to find out later in the week that those properties were tough to hunt because there was so much standing corn around. And anyway, long story short, every hunt we had out there just did not really work out like we thought it would because the properties looked so promising. I mean, when you go out west to the Midwest and you hunt those states, the territory is just deer heaven. Like, nothing like you've seen in Michigan, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The ditches and the food, the amount of food source, nuts. So I hunted a different property, didn't see any deer that evening, and then the next morning, I think I had an encounter with a buck at first light. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did.
I did, and I was sitting on the ground, which I did a lot in that trip. It's something that I've grown to really enjoy doing when I'm bow hunting because it's so challenging. And at first light, I had a buck come in, and I actually drew back on him because I could tell he was a stud. But when I drew back and he got to 30, I was on him, and I was looking outside my peep sight trying to figure out what the heck he was. Long story short, I didn't shoot, but I at least got to have an encounter. I saw a couple other studs that morning. And that evening, I actually ended up, you
sat
shot a buck.
Yeah.
Yeah, shot a buck the night before. And you were talking about how prime of a spot it was. And it was kind of close to where I hunted that morning, the night before. I knew the area where it was, but you said you found a tree stand back there, so I wanted to go sit in that stand. And sure enough, at last light, I had a nice buck, which is another cool story or weird story. My dad was sitting with me because he was tagged out, and he filmed me the whole week. And I had this dandy of a buck come through the apple orchard. And I call it an apple orchard. What do we call those things?
Yeah, I forget what they were.
They're not apples. I just don't know what they're called. They're big and yellow, and the deer don't eat them. They're weird looking. They're almost like the size of a volleyball. They're gigantic.
Yeah, they're huge. Yep. I can't think of the word right now. But
Yeah,
I know what you're saying.
I had this buck come through, and I remember right away my dad goes, it's a doe. He saw it first. And so I'm kind of calm, but I had my bow in my hands. And all of a sudden I look, and he's at 30 yards in this thicket. I have one shooting lane. This deer pops out. I'm like, holy smokes, that's a freaking nice buck. Like, I see a nice rack on him at 30 yards instantly. So I draw back because I was like, that's a great deer. I remember stopping him because I saw him from the side. He was broadside. And I wanted to see how wide he was and how tall he was. So I stopped. He looks up like they always do. And I just could tell that it was a good buck. And I was going to let one rip. And I was drawn back full draw. But what I didn't take into account was that I alerted the buck, like I've seen so many times on TV and hunt shows. And I shoot, and I hear the whack, that every hunter is used to. And It was kind of late. I had my Luminant going. And honestly, I thought I had killed a deer. I really did. And if you go back to the footage, it sounds good. The way the deer reacts just seems like I had a dead deer. And I was like, holy smokes, it's over, day 2. Buck down. Long story short, I grazed him pretty bad. And the funny story on that is I don't know, how did you end up hearing about it?
Larry texted, so the guy who owned the property had texted me a picture 2 or 3 weeks later with this buck dead. So this is like, the way this works is these are properties that people travel around the country to come hunt them, and they're 1 week leases. So every week they got kind of a new group of hunters coming in. And the first week of gun season, the people that were hunting that property ended up shooting the buck that Robbie grazed. It wasn't. I don't know if I call that a graze.
I know.
He dug in. I don't know how you didn't hit the spine.
I know. I took a hunk of meat out of his back, and I mean, all I found was hair, and my arrow was clean. But now I understand why I heard the whack, because I took a chunk of meat. I still don't know how I didn't spine that deer.
Yeah, I mean, you missed it by millimeters, but I mean, the deer would have lived. But somebody dusted him with a shotgun, and he ended up being a nice 3-year-old 9-point. I mean, it would have been a buck that you would have been very happy to go home with.
I was, but now that everything, I look back on it. I was disappointed at the time, but everything happens for a reason. And I ended up not shooting a buck that week, and I had some crazy encounters and saw some phenomenal deer after that never would have happened because I would have been tagged out. You know what I mean?
Correct. So we're gonna fast forward. So in between now and I think it was day 6 or day 5, between then and day 5 or 6, correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have had one encounter with a shooter. You passed up a lot of 1.5, 2.5-year-old bucks. And then came the day after my dad shot a buck. That'll be a story for another time. But so my dad and I were tagged out. So was your dad, and it was the most picture perfect early November day that you can it was, I think it was 16 degrees when you guys got to the stand that morning, and the high all day was 27.
It was, when I think about that day, and this sounds corny, but it's honestly one of the best days of my life. And it was just, I remember before the week started, when we were looking at the 7-day forecast, remember we saw that day that it was supposed to drop.
Yep.
The temperature was supposed to drop and the pressure was supposed to be high. We were like, man, that day is going to be unbelievable.
Yep.
Do you remember?
100%. I remember when we were talking about it the week before we left. Our hopes weren't that high because you know how forecasts change, but it was completely correct, and that's what happened. The temperature dropped. Not the temperature was very hot, but I think it got up into like the 50s one day, and then it dropped like 35, 40 degrees overnight. The pressure skyrocketed, and you knew you were in and you ended up sitting all day.
Yeah, wasn't it? I want to say when I first got out there, it was like single digits cold.
It might have been. I don't remember what the low was. I just know it was like there's no way that there's not going to be deer on their feet all day today.
I was freezing. I remember that. So yeah, I saw that weather pattern coming, and it had to have been November the 7th or something like
Yeah,
that.
like the day,
Yeah,
yeah.
the heart of the rut and perfect temperature. I'm like, I need to go. I need to get into the heart of the woods, and I just need to get aggressive. And I know these deer are gonna be moving all day.
You were sitting on top of the ridge, correct?
Yeah, but to start the morning, I was worried about getting in there because there was a crazy frost. So I actually sat on the field edge until probably 8 or 9 o'clock. Where I don't want to give it away, but where your dad shot his buck, I
Yep.
sat there that first morning because you could get in there quietly.
That's right. You guys didn't get into the stand till 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so I hunted in that spot where the hay bales are, and we saw some does come through, like 7 or 8 does. We waited till 9 or 8. I think it was 8, because remember, everything. It's an hour. It got light so.
Yeah, it got light at like 10 after 6. It
Oh,
was
it's nuts.
somewhat brutal, but
Yeah,
worth
you had
it.
we had to wake up so early to get out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we work our way into the timber, probably 8, 9 o'clock. We're definitely set up by 9 for sure. And right away, man, it was nuts. There's no other way to put it. We had, I think, like 3 2-year-olds at the bottom of the ridge. You just can see the way they're acting. It's just peak of the rut, full swing, dumb as can be. These deer just looking for does, and I'm just like, oh man, this is gonna be a good day.
Isn't it funny the difference between a 2-year-old in Michigan and a 2-year-old anywhere else in the country?
Oh, I know. They look at how many 1.5 and 2-year-old bucks could I have just demolished? Which is an opportunity that I don't really
Pass up in Michigan.
No, I don't see that in Michigan. I mean, I usually shoot the bucks every year in Michigan, but I have to work my freaking tail off. And
Yeah.
I don't see 7 bucks in a day, or 8 bucks, or 8 encounters. And that's what I don't remember what the number was, but it was something like that once the day ended. And the most memorable,
Was that like noon, wasn't it?
Haunts me. It was 11 o'clock. So this day, when I got there, every half an hour, maybe even less, like every 20 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, somewhere in there, I would just take out a doe bleat, my can, and I would just turn it once or twice. Because I know that these deer are now bedded down if a buck's in the area.
Yeah, they're moving.
They're just going to be walking somewhere in my region, and I can know at any time a bruiser's just going to be coming, So I'm up. The way this stand was set up, I really did not like it. I had a great view down one ridge, but the other way it was a cedar thicket. There's no other way to put it. You can't see through it. You can't shoot into it much. So it's 11 o'clock. It had to have been 11, maybe close to noon, somewhere in there. I turn the can once. That's all I do. And then I'm listening. It's dead silent. And you just hear it. Shh, 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 shh. That every deer hunter knows and loves.
Yeah.
But all the time. And, I'm looking in that cedar thicket, and 20 yards, I just see this gigantic rack coming through these cedars. Gosh, it fires me up just thinking about it right now, but it also haunts me. And this thing is coming right at me, and I'm not ready at all. I don't have my bow. It's still on the hanger. And he's obviously coming right to the doe bleat. And believe it or not, this deer had a collar too. But this deer was way bigger than the one I had encountered that first morning. And my heart is just pumping through my chest, man. And I reached for my bow, and I actually grabbed it, and he was so close at that time. Like, he had to have been 15 yards when I'm making all this movement. He just got nervous like the big bucks do. And he just stared right at me. And I knew I was toast. He was probably 12 yards.
Oh.
And I'll never forget it, man. I don't even know if I could have shot because it was so thick. That's how thick the spot was. 12 yards, I don't even think I could have shot.
So, in hindsight, if the situation was a 180 and you saw this buck coming from 100 yards and were ready, you still don't think you could have gotten a shot through the stuff he was walking through?
No, if he would have just kept walking, the way he was walking on the ridge, I would have found a hole sooner or later if I was ready. But where he stopped and was staring at me broadside, it was, oh my gosh, I could have let one rip, I guess, but it'd be a miracle if I got it through there. It was that many cedar limbs in the way. But I'll never forget. I mean, I've never had I don't know what this deer was. Let's just say 150 inches. I've never had a 150-inch buck 12 to 15 yards from me either. In my heart was through my chest, man. Nuts.
That's the feeling you live for, though.
Oh. And then 2 hours later, I had another booner come, giant 8-point, working down the ridge from me. He was probably 50 or 60, but that was pretty much it, man. But just all those encounters, those bucks I saw that day. And
oh, you guys got, I mean, even your dad, who can't run a camera to save his life, he got great footage of just multiple bucks that, you know, any day in Michigan, you just put the hammer on.
Yeah.
Especially up where you live, you know, and, but that's still, you know, being a Michigan boy, it's amazing how much you appreciate passing up bucks, because you don't pass up 2-3-year-old bucks in Michigan. You just don't do it.
And it was one of those things I've never had. Like, I had 2-year-old bucks come under me that was just nice 8-pointers, you know,
yeah.
Like the deer that get my heart pumping in Michigan. And I've had great hunts and experiences shooting in Michigan. And I'm just passing it up like it's nothing.
Yeah, you're passing it up like it's a button buck in Michigan.
I know. It's a different world. That's the only way to put it.
Oh, man, that was just an unbelievable week. We have a bunch of different stories coming from a bunch of different angles from that week. I'm going to get your dad on to tell his side of the story of, you know, him calling you, and then obviously my dad. That was, I mean, I think his hunt might have even trumped your dad's on, you know, being on the ground and making it happen.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Just, I mean, the ups and downs too. I won't get too much into what my dad did, but and then, you know, me, I'm not going to tell much of my story, you know, how that went. I mentioned that before. I mean,
it's a good story, dude. It's a good story.
You don't need what happened. I shot a buck that Robbie passed. We'll just say that. But at the end of the day, just a phenomenal hunt. I mean, at the end of the day, I got to be with my dad for that hunt that we'll get into later, and that was probably one of the highlights of my hunting career so far, is being with my dad on that hunt. And then, you know, I mean, the fun of the whole week is like every day getting together at the end of the day and talking about the hunts, and because it really wasn't much service, it's not like we were texting back and forth all day. So it was kind of like the good old-fashioned deer camp where you get back to the cabin and you're telling stories of the day, and that's what we live for.
Man, it just pumps me up just thinking about it. I wish I could go back. And your dad's story is top. That was a great story. Morning I'll never forget. And I'll stick up for you. The buck that you shot is not a buck you're used to passing up. That's the bucks that we're talking about.
Yeah,
the ones that in Michigan you get jacked up for. So it's hard, man.
For sure. And you know, at the end of the day, I'm still eating them, and he's you know, his racks on my wall. It's still something that I'm proud of. It's just a memory, you know.
Shooting deer is always fun, no matter what.
It is. When you can get meat in the freezer, especially when it's a nice lethal kill, and you don't have to worry about, you know, tracking a wounded animal. I mean, it's just, there's nothing beats it. And that was just an unbelievable week. We'll have a bunch of stories come from that week in Missouri. But I will say, if you live in Michigan and you hunt in Michigan in the rut every year, take some vacation time in the next couple of years and get yourself some Iowa points, or go out to Missouri. Do something different, not to knock on Michigan, but it's something that every passionate whitetail hunter has to experience, is the rut in the heart of whitetail country.
There's no question about it. But don't come take our hunt spots. So don't try to recruit too much.
No, we're not going to market where we were going, but there's plenty of public land out there for everybody to enjoy. You know, I'm going to have your brother on later. While we were in Missouri tearing it up, he shot a beautiful buck in Ohio.
That's a good story too.
Yeah, so, but hey, Rob, appreciate you hopping on, man. It's fun to listen to your stories. I know you weren't able to get it done that week, but it just gives you something to look forward to this year now that you're heading back.
Most definitely, man. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure. Big fan of what you're doing, man. Keep it going.
Thanks, brother. I'm sure I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, man. Sounds good.
See ya. Well, that was Robbie Enslin. Thank you guys for listening to that. I know, sometimes hunting stories aren't as great when you don't, put a buck on the ground there's certain, it's how you rate success. And I think Robbie, like he said, it doesn't matter about filling a tag. The experiences and the encounters and the time he had in the stand with his dad over the course of the week, the time that I had with my dad over the course of the week, you can't beat it. You can't match it. And it's just what we live for. I love whitetail hunting. I love the camaraderie. Robbie and I grew up hunting together, so being able to do that together and go out to that beautiful whitetail country in northwest Missouri and chase, giant bucks was just, oh man, it was a week of a lifetime. And I'm sure him and I will have more, great weeks of whitetail hunting in the future, but it's just something to look back on. And like I said with Robbie, though, whatever you have to do, save up the money, get out there at least once in your life to experience the first 2 weeks in November out in Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, that whole Deer Haven out there. It's something that every whitetail hunter has to experience. Even though my hunt ended after, one day I shot my buck the first night, I was able to hunt with my dad the rest of the week and, watch the footage and listen to the stories that Tom and Robbie had. And it was just a memorable week, unbelievable experiences, unbelievable encounters, chasing whitetails, chasing legends. It was amazing. So anyway, we'll be back in a few weeks with another story for you. Hope you enjoyed this one, and whatever you have to do to get out there shed hunting, start scouting, ice fishing, small game hunting, whatever you have to do, get outside, stay wild. Have a good one.